Hello, everyone. Welcome to the FrontierView webinar on how the Biden presidency will impact Latin America, risks and opportunities of key policy changes. We're going to begin in just a few moments. We have a number of clients queued up waiting to join. So while we wait, I encourage everyone to log into the GoToWebinar if you haven't done so already so that you can view the materials that we will present today. We will also conduct a couple of live polling questions through that medium. So please, if you can get on to the GoToWebinar, please do. And as a reminder, as part of this, you're welcome to submit any questions by clicking on the Q&A box of the GoToWebinar application on the right-hand side of your screen, and just type it to FrontierView Webinars, and we'll try to weave those into the conversation. If for some reason we can't weave them into the conversation, we'll be sure to get answers back out to you in another format, email most likely. So if we'll begin in about 30 seconds. Thanks for your patience. All right, why don't we go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. And on behalf of FrontierView, thank you for joining our webinar series. On today's webcast, we will be diving into how the Biden presidency will impact Latin America. We'll be taking a deep dive into what are the Biden administration's top policy priorities and how LATAM fits in, who are Biden's top foreign policy cabinet picks and why they matter for Latin America, what are the key topics that drive the U.S.-LATAM bilateral agenda, and among other issues, on top of that. And all of this will be covered through the lens of how to best prepare your regional business. My name is Richard Leggett, and I'm the CEO of FrontierView, and I'm very excited to be moderating this discussion, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Alejandro Valerio, FrontierView's Associate Practice Leader for Latin America. Alejandro and I would like this to be a highly interactive discussion, so please be sure to click on the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen and send your questions to FrontierView Webinars, and we will work to get as many questions included in the discussion as possible. Also, as a reminder, if you are a client, you can access all of our LATAM research, including all of Alejandro's research and all of our market intelligence research and data on your FrontierView desktop and mobile applications simply by logging on. And if you're not a client, for registered attendees of this webinar, we're offering complimentary trial access to FrontierView. To take advantage of this offer, please request a trial in the comment box or simply visit our website, www.frontierview.com, and click the Request Trial button. Before we get started into the conversation, we realize that some of you may be new to FrontierView, so I'd like to take a moment to provide you with a quick overview of our firm and how we support multinational executives. FrontierView is a premier global market intelligence and advisory firm, and our primary focus is on serving the market intelligence needs of global business professionals at multinational corporations by informing and empowering their market monitoring, strategic planning, and international growth priorities. From the beginning, we set out to build FrontierView to be different in three primary ways. First is our product and service model, which has been purpose-built to serve a global business audience. In every aspect of our work, some of which you'll see on display here today, we strive to separate signal from noise and always answer the so what, now what questions that are unique to the international business professional. Second differentiator is our model, which we call Strategic Intelligence as a Service. FrontierView is the only market intelligence solution that bundles together information services, access to our analysts, and senior executive network events under one roof. And then finally, we're especially proud of our world-class technology, which powers the FrontierView desktop and mobile applications and has been built with the sole purpose of informing our clients' workflows and decision processes. We are also incredibly proud of our broad and diverse client base, which today includes a community of over 4,000 and is growing rapidly. As you can see here, we serve senior executives and their teams, and our clients span sectors and functions. Again, if you're not a client and are interested in receiving trial access to FrontierView program, please visit our website and click the Request Trial button. Okay, having briefly introduced the company, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our presenter. Alejandro is FrontierView's Associate Practice Leader for Latin America. He leads our Mexico practice and is also responsible for Central America. Alejandro, thank you for joining me today. The timing couldn't be better for this discussion on the eve of the inauguration.
Thank you, Rich, for having me. It's great to be here.
And we have a lot of ground to cover, and I thought the way to approach this was to break our discussion down into three main topics. So first, I'd like to just do a broader view of President-elect Biden's top policy priorities and who his top foreign policy cabinet picks are, and where things currently stand and what we can expect. After we've done that, I think we can explain the top issues that are currently driving the U.S.-LATAM agenda. And then third, I thought we could take a trip around the region and dive country by country or cluster of countries into the top issues that will be underpinning the U.S.-LATAM bilateral relationship. Does that sound like a good plan?
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, great. I think before we get started, though, we would like to pose a question to our audience. And so if we could, if I could ask all of you that are on the line, if you could quickly answer to this question: do you expect Biden's presidency to be better for your business in Latin America than President Trump's? And if you could just select one answer quickly here, we can kick off the discussion. We'll take just about 10 seconds for everybody to put in their votes. Okay. Well, it looks like the consensus is around somewhat better to consistently, significantly better. Alejandro, how does that dovetail with some of the anecdotal conversations you've been having since the November election?
Well, I can tell you the following, Rich. Like, for example, in the case of Mexico, most of the executives were happy with Trump policy. And that has to do because he has been some sort of a check to AMLO's policy. And everybody knows, like in the case of Mexico, and we can dive in deeper later on, President Lopez Obrador's erratic policy has definitely deteriorated the operating environment. And that has been definitely, I would say, that a handicap for the economy in a market that has been quite resilient. On the other hand, when we see that, like, you know, the pro-Trump growth and the fact that the economy was doing quite well before the pandemic actually was shattered like actually what the U.S. was in this some sort of bull market. Overall, it helped to trickle down in terms of commodity, in terms of remittances, and in terms of some of the economies that are quite linked to the U.S. But what we hear that so far from the Biden administration, it might be something good down the road and something that we can explore that as we go deeper now in this conversation.
All right, well, let's jump right in then, Alejandro. So with the incoming administration led to be tomorrow by President Biden, there are many moving pieces, obviously, in the international landscape. Can you please set the stage for us on what exactly are the top priorities for the Biden administration and where LATAM fits into that overall picture?
Yeah, that's a good question, Rich. So we can start. You can see here in the screen that soon-to-be President Biden, he has a lot on his plate. And that's something important to bear in mind. Like, so the first thing, and he has made that clear, his first point, that he will put all his efforts to contain the pandemic in the US, which is right now the hardest hit country in the world in terms of cases and in terms of also the death toll. On the other hand, like, you know, the economy, it's the other front that is also attached to the pandemic. I mean, there is a lot of people suffering in the US, like a small, medium-sized business actually are now, to use a slang, they're getting creamed and they need help. And that's why, like, his economic package goes in that direction to help the economy and to help also household. On the other front, when we think about it at the international policy level, you can see here the relationship with China, which is actually the most important bilateral relationship in the 21st century, is going to be the top priority for Biden. And that has to do not only with trade, but also with the situation in the South China Sea, and then the fact that China has become more assertive at the international level. And we will talk about that when we see that how is China performing in Latin America, for that matter. So that would be, I would say, the second topic that the Biden administration is going to be focusing on. Another one that is really important, not only for the international policy realm, but also for the economy, it's that President Biden announced that he will rejoin the Paris Agreement on climate change, that he will be betting heavily on green technology. And I would say that that will have ripple effects, not only for the international front, but also at the domestic level. On the forefront, there is the issue with Iran. I mean, everybody knows that President Trump basically got into the White House with a wrecking ball to tarnish what it was Obama policy, and that was at the forefront was the Iran nuclear deal, which I think the Biden administration would also try to pay attention from the beginning. Then rebuilding the alliance of the U.S., particularly with the European, I mean, something unprecedented happened with President Trump, which is actually he was fighting with the partners of the U.S., the traditional partners actually clustered in the NATO. And then on the two other levels, I would say that counterbalance, the Russia influence, and not only about, we hear that all the time in terms of cyber attacks, but also when you go deeper in terms of Russia foreign policy in a strategic sector in Eurasia or in Syria. And finally, the Korean Peninsula situation, the nuclear situation over there is always a top priority for the U.S. And President Biden also will be paying attention to that front. When you see all these topics, definitely Latin America is not at the forefront. However, many of these topics, like the U.S.-China relationship, the issue with climate change, or even like relationship like Iran and Venezuela or Russia influence in the region. Those are the way the issues that were LATAM actually fitting in this broader picture that Biden is going to be dealing. I will make another point here that Biden, on the contrary, that President Trump, he will go back to a more institutional ways to handle the foreign policy. And we all remember that President Trump gave a lot of privilege to this, what the French like to call tête-à-tête, like face-to-face, and then also this back channel. And for example, his outgoing senior advisor, Jared Kushner, he handled a really deep big portfolio, going from renegotiating NAFTA to all the way to issues in the Middle East or even relationship with Russia. I would say with Biden, he will put more emphasis on diplomacy, but also building on the traditional and quality of the foreign service of the U.S.
Well, so let's dig in then, because it seems that from what we've read, that President-elect Biden has put together a pretty cohesive and experienced foreign policy team to go after this, incredible agenda of issues that you just outlined. And likewise, this team seems to fit the Biden priority of hitting the ground running and being ready from day one, which has been a very, very big focus of during the transition. So in your view, tell us a little bit about this team and what issues and countries that this team will be paying most closely attention to in Latin America.
That's a good point, Rich. I would say the following. You can see here what are actually like the top foreign policy team that Biden put together. I would definitely point attention immediately to the two gentlemen on the left, which would be the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. Those two are the most trusted foreign policy advisor of Biden. They have a good working relationship that actually spanned for the last 15 years, at least in the case of the incoming Secretary of State. Then when you see all these positions, they have a particular relevance depending on which area of LATAM. Of course, when we think about it, the Secretary of State or the incoming Secretary of Defense or the National Security Advisor, they will be paying attention to the whole region because it falls into their portfolio. But when we think about more pressing issues at the current level, like I would say in the case of the National Security Advisor, he will be paying close attention to Mexico because not only about the trade, but when you think about it, the whole issue with drug cartels, like migration flows coming from Mexico, the Northern Triangle, for that matter. And then Brazil as well, because that has to do particularly with the presence of China in Latin America, which is the most important and relevant presence in the region at this moment. When you look at the other part of the cabinet, for example, thinking about it from a business standpoint, somebody might think that the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations might not have any relevance to the region. But when we think about it, like actually the UN Security Council is the most important regional body when you think about security and then also in many ways in the political economy of great power politics, countries like Mexico, Brazil, and Venezuela might be on the radar of the incoming U.S. ambassador in the United Nations. In the case of Mexico, because Mexico will be part of, has a non-permanent member in the UN Security Council for the next 2 years. Brazil, because of the issue of climate change, that actually it's a major topic, like I pointed out before, for the Biden administration, and Venezuela, because of the ongoing crisis, is always an issue where there is a clash between Russia, China, and the US. That's what I say, that she will be paying attention to these 3 countries in the region. And then something that is really important, and we saw that yesterday in all the headlines, the case of the Secretary of Homeland Security. Alejandro Mayorkas was the head of the unit inside the Homeland Security that handled the whole DACA program, which is actually the program that President Obama established by an executive order that prohibit like people to be deported that came here when they were a child. I think Mayorkas, it's a major player for the sweeping immigration reform that President Biden is planning to propose tomorrow from day one. So I will definitely pay attention to that issue because that would have ripple effects when we think about remittances. And in the case of John Kerry, you know that he's would be the climate change czar. John Kerry, Brazil, because of the climate change issue and the situation in the Amazon, would be a top priority. But for example, people might not know this, but John Kerry might be a good back channel to deal with the Venezuelan crisis, because Kerry has a long-term relationship with Maduro. A long time ago, in an informal group they were both part, called the Boston Group, which was an unofficial group of legislators, where Maduro and Kerry actually they overlap, and they use it as a back channel to diffuse or to de-escalate the crisis when Chavez and George W. Bush were at the head of both states.
All right, that's really a helpful context on the players. Now let's talk a little bit about the agenda itself, and specifically, I'm interested from our client's perspective. What are the key issues that are framing the U.S. LATAM bilateral agenda? You've hinted at some of them in the introductory comments here, but let's dive into the specific issues. And while we're doing it, Alejandro, I think, kind of an overview of the issues, but also maybe help us prioritize which issues are likely to get the most attention, certainly in the first years of the Biden administration. And given all that's going on, maybe we're even talking about the first term here, because there's so much happening that has to take precedence here domestically. But help us understand this roadmap of issues and where our clients should focus their efforts in understanding the implications for their business.
That's a good point. You can see here, we try to frame this. I mean, there is a lot of topics. Definitely, like the fact that Latin America is not at the forefront, it doesn't mean that it's going to be overlooked by the Biden administration. And the way I would say that executives and multinationals should think about it, it's the U.S. LATAM, it's been driven by a myriad of issues. It's a whole package of agenda that it goes all the way from trade and investment, particularly when we think about in the case of Mexico, which is the largest, one of the top large trade partner of the U.S. The relations with Cuba, which is actually the relic of the Cold War, but it's still a hot topic when we think about it, the broader U.S.-LATAM relations. Corruption, because it's always at the forefront of the U.S., and when you think about it, what the incoming National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, has been pointed out, that the U.S. is going to be strengthening and advocating for the rule of law. And the case of corruption is always a pressing issue in LATAM and also affecting the business environment overall. Governance crisis, I mean, LATAM before the pandemic was already affected by protracted crisis like the case of Venezuela, or in places like in the Southern Cone, and even the poster child of macroeconomic instability like Chile was actually rocked before the pandemic. Migration that actually is quite a relevant topic when we think about Central America, Mexico, and the Caribbean, and that's another issue that is really important, and is really important from day one for the Biden administration. And then when you see here to the right, LATAM has a battleground of great power politics. It's actually more how LATAM fit in the picture vis-a-vis the relations between the US and China first, and then the US and Russia, and in a certain degree to India too, but most importantly, when we think about Russia and China, which are actually the two major foes of the US at the international level. And then other issues like, security, and that has to do particularly with the border, narco trafficking coming from Mexico, and that complex relationship that goes in the whole umbrella of the US and Mexico relationship. And climate change, which was not at the forefront of the Trump administration, it's at the forefront of the Biden administration, and that will have a particular effect in cases like Brazil, for example. When you think about it, all these issues, I would say that climate change would be a top priority for Biden for day one on one hand, and that would have effect when we think about Brazil, which is the largest market in Latin America. The relations with Cuba, that would be a gradual process, and we can talk about that down the road, and that has a particular effect at the domestic level because of the importance of Florida, which is a key swing state that again would be out for grab in 2024. The Venezuela crisis to its linkage to the Cuba, and I would say that since the Venezuelan population is actually increasing in Florida, that would be something that I would say Biden might be paying attention to at the beginning of his term. Migration, we already saw that from day one, a sweeping immigration reform that would have consequential effects across the region, particularly for Central America and Mexico. And then, of course, when you think about security and trade and the whole overall relationship with Mexico, it's a top priority for Biden for day one.
Okay, good. Well, so this chart is a good roadmap for our clients to kind of prioritize this set of issues. Now, before we take our tour specifically around the region, I do want to sort of also talk about the domestic agendas in Latin America, because over the next 2 years, we're expecting a fair amount of political volatility stemming from a number of electoral battles that are going to take place across the continent. And those outcomes may also shape the forward-looking Biden policy agenda through that lens. And so if we could very quickly just walk us through the region electoral battles and kind of what your views are, I think that'll help set the stage for then the deeper dive country and sub-region regional tour we're going to take.
Sure. You can see here in this map that me and my colleagues, we use all the time because he helps to put the stage in the right place where we think about LATAM in the next 2 years. I mean, politics is a major issue here, and we're going to have consequential elections, starting with Mexico now on June 6th, where it's going to be at stake the Chamber of Deputies. And that is important because if the opposition gain control of that, it will take the rubber stand when we think about the budget, which is a major issue for business and for government spending overall in the Mexico operating environment. Then, when we think about another major market, Colombia is heading to the presidential election in 2022. And Colombia today has polarized as it was back in 2016 after they actually put close, or if we can use in quotation, a close to the violent conflict that has been ravaging that country for the last 50 years. So it's still hyper polarized, and there was already suffering from some volatility and social unrest before the pandemic. The pandemic only just put it on rest. Then when you go down in the Andean region, Ecuador is heading to presidential election in 2021 right now in February, where it's going to put in a collision court former allies. The former president, Rafael Correa, he's backing Andrés Arauz, and he's going to go head to head with the opposition that is now led by Guillermo Lasso, that lost by a nail in the last presidential election. And that's actually important in the case of Ecuador, when we think about the IMF austerity measure that has been installed. And the candidate that might have more chances to win actually promised to shred it apart. Peru is heading to an election in April 21, where actually in Peru, 2 presidents resigned because of corruption scandal, has risen like a few months ago. And that's something that in Peru, it's hyper important when we think about the operating environment and affecting investment, that it's something that definitely clients and firms overall are paying attention. Then Chile is more complex because it's not only about the presidential elections that are going to be taking place, but also about the whole process that is taking place place to change the constitution. And that actually is really important because depending of the outcome of the constitutional process and the election, we're going to see where Chile is heading to in the next 3 to 5 years, and even the long term, because this is actually probably a wrecking moment, and Chile is at the crossroads. So that's one of the most important electoral process. And just to finalize, Argentina and Brazil. In Argentina, the legislative election in October 2021 is going to be a good benchmark to measure where the Peronistas stand today, led by Alberto Fernandez. And we're going to see that actually how that play out. And Brazil, the presidential election in October 22 is going to put on the ballot Bolsonaro, the controversial far-right president, who is called like, the tropical Trump. For that matter. So that's where we are, and you can see all the top market are heading to consequential elections, and we will see how that actually play out and how that might have an effect to multinationals.
I don't think you'll be getting much rest over the next 2 years, it looks like from this chart. Well, having charted the electoral processes and the key elections and policy battlefields, maybe we can start going deeper across the region. And a good way to begin might be starting with Mexico and Brazil as top Latin American markets for most of our clients. And then we can go from there as time permits. And as a reminder to our listeners, if you have a question you want to submit, please feel free to submit it in the question box, the comment box, and we will work it into the conversation. So Mexico, country that has the most complex and arguably the most important bilateral relationship with the United States. And then obviously Brazil is the most important market for many of our clients given its size and the size of the economy. So I want to start with two fundamental questions, starting with Mexico. How do you view the Biden administration with regards to AMLO's policies and specifically his economic policy that has generated significant noise among investors and the business community?
That's a good point, Rich, and it's always a question that is always pop out when I talk to clients now. And this is a way I try to explain that when we think about it, like what are the structural issues that drive the relationship between the U.S. and Mexico. Biden will have definitely an impact like any other U.S. administration on Mexico. And I would say that to begin to, it might be positive or negative for AMLO, but also it might be positive and negative for the economy. When we think about it, like particularly in the energy sector, Biden, as I pointed out, he's heading to the green technology, and definitely that put him immediately in a clash with AMLO, who is betting heavily on revamped payments, which is a faltering company, and he's going to continue to have major problems down the road. So that would be negative for AMLO on that front on the energy, but it might be positive for the economy if that actually forces AMLO to change the government spending priorities and to avoid what he's doing right now, which is actually burning cash, just bankrolling payments, which he has a plan until 2022. When we think about other important issues, for example, with the USMCA and trade, which I put it here, it might be negative for AMLO, it might be negative also for the business environment in Mexico, because Biden has pledged to enforce and to pay a lot of attention to the labor chapter. The labor chapter actually, and that would be the supervising the increase of wages in Mexico from $3 to $16 by 2023, was the last obstacle and the last hurdle that it was actually surpassed by the US and Mexico to finalize the deal. And the Mexican business community overall, they were kind of skeptical. And I would say that with the Trump administration, he wouldn't have put a lot of pressure on that front. On the contrary, Biden, that has the support of the unions of the US and manufacturing has become a major issue, I would say he will be putting more pressure on Mexico on that front. And then when you think about it, other issues, like I would say immigration might be positive for AMLO and for Mexico overall, because of the sweeping immigration reform that Biden put on the plate on one hand. And then on the other hand, with Biden, it would be the traditional Republican and Democrat, which is actually decoupling security, commerce from migration. We remember, Rich, there was some sort of panic back in May of 2019 when Trump, by a tweet, he said that there was actually a record level of migration flow coming from through the U.S. southwestern border. And Trump said, I'm going to put tariff from 5 to 25% and destabilize the peso, like depreciated 3% immediately in just 2 days. We're not going to see that with the Biden administration. So he will handle that more in institutional ways. And that would be good for when we think about the FX, when we think about it actually for the overall relationship overall. But then when you see that here, AMLO and Biden, they don't see eye to eye in many issues. Like in Venezuela, AMLO already sent a letter like, he wants to reinforce the principle of non-intervention. There was a recent controversial law that it was passed in Mexico now in security, that it will have a major effect to in the relationship. So that's the way I see that in Mexico and how Biden is going to play out. And just to wrap it up here, something that I would say is important, that Biden, and with the economic stimulus package that he put there, it's going to help remittances going to Mexico, which you just received last year, a record level more than 40 billion. And it was actually an increase even in the midst of this pandemic. And that was actually one of the main drivers helping consumption, the economy overall, and helping companies like in the B2C sector.
Yeah, you actually stole my thunder, because I was going to ask how the Biden economic policies would affect the business outlook and the economic outlook in Mexico, but I think you hinted at that. Anything else you want to make on that point before I move on?
Well, I would say besides the USMCA, the economic stimulus that he announced, 1,400, that's going to keep, at least for the first half of this year, remittances in a good trend. And where clients can see that this is at the national level, remittances are actually increasing across Mexico, with the exception of this tiny state here called Tlaxcala. And that's a trend that is going to continue based on what you pointed out, Biden economic policy.
Yeah, it would strike me that with the short-term stimulus, hopefully getting the pandemic under control, and then a reopening of the economy, plus a more favorable immigration stance, you're going to see this be a very positive trend for maybe for the entirety of the term.
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about the role of China specifically, and whether that Mexico will continue to gain from what has been tension in the U.S.-China trade war in terms of trade, supply chains, nearshore manufacturing and that sort of thing, but also more importantly, U.S.-China relations in the context of LATAM. In a way, LATAM is a bit of a proxy battle or a proxy war potentially for U.S.-China relations. So I think this is an important topic to cover, and this might be a good moment to cover it.
Yep, that's a good point, Rich. And I would put it like this way: like China has made inroads. Definitely, China is not China and Mexico. They're not complementary. But on the other hand, when we think about it, the current government in Mexico, and when we think about it, like the need of resources, that's something that definitely Western multinationals should be paying attention. How China is making inroads, and in the case of Mexico, you can see here, across different sectors, Chinese company has made a lot of progress. Like just to put an example, this company CCC won one of the concessions of the Tren Maya by close to $700 million from Yucatan to Quintana Roo. On the other hand, this Hong Kong Chinese company, Hutchinson Whampoa, already have a strong presence in 4 key ports of Mexico, here in Baja California, in Colima, or in Veracruz. And even in the automotive sector, which is, so put it in perspective, around $130 billion of the bulk of exports going from Mexico to the US, they already have a significant presence. And even in other key industry like lithium, like Ganfeng Lithium here, it's already making a lot of investment in the Sonora lithium rich mine. So that's something that I would definitely be paying attention. And then on the other hand, when we think about telecommunication, Huawei and CTE, they're already becoming one of the largest sellers of smartphones in Mexico.
Wow. Okay. I'm watching the time, and I want to make sure we work our way around the region. So maybe we turn to Brazil here, Alejandro, and I'd like us to talk about Brazil, and specifically, I think 2 topics that come to mind and are essential for the U.S. strategic interests in the region in general, and for Biden and the Biden administration. The first one, which you've hinted at the outset and throughout, has been climate change. And President-elect Biden, as you point out, has announced his intention to rejoin the Paris Agreement on day one. And that's a 180-degree difference from the Trump administration.
Yep.
So I want to talk a little bit about how important climate change is for U.S.-Brazil relations under the Biden administration and the Bolsonaro administrations. And then tied to that, maybe you can also hint on if there's a risk of economic sanctions being imposed by Biden on Brazil because of the situation going on with the deforestation in the Amazon. And that was an issue that President-elect Biden had brought up throughout the debates and the campaign trail. Now that he's taking power, what does that mean for Brazil? And then I'll talk about the second topic once we go through this one.
Sure. Briefly, in the case of the Amazon, with Biden, Bolsonaro will have a pressure that he didn't have with Trump. President Trump didn't put any pressure. I mean, they were both on the same page in terms of climate change. Like you might call that denying the climate change, calling a hoax, and so forth and so on. Biden already hinted that he's willing to partner with the Europeans and to put a $20 billion fund and to target Brazil in case they don't do many progress to the deforestation, which is actually went to a rapid pace in 2019 and 2020. So, but on the other hand, I would say that Bolsonaro already saving face, and the Minister of Environment say that they're welcoming and they might be willing to work with the U.S. So we might see that at him. And definitely they should be paying attention because there already be multinationals like actually quitting on Brazil leather, like the case of Vans, North Face. They renounce like to use the Brazilian leather because of what's happening with the Amazon. So I would say multinationals and Bolsonaro should be paying attention, should take it seriously in the case of Biden, and what he pointed out about the threat of the climate change and the Amazon situation.
And before we move on to the slide I think you're showing here, which is my second question, coming back to the China question, we do have a question that one of our listeners has asked, and I think it's a good point to insert it here, which is President Bolsonaro supported his campaign and the government in Brazil getting much closer to President Trump. And even after the election result, President Bolsonaro did not congratulate Biden and pointed to the possibility of fraud in the United States elections, that, therefore essentially supporting Trump. So how can the Brazilian president's stance affect the relationship between the two countries? And is it possible for the exchange rate to return to the scenario of 2 to 3 years ago?
Well, first of all, I would say that Biden is not a child. Biden has been around the block. 47 years in politics. Biden is not gonna hold a grudge against AMLO or against Bolsonaro or even Putin. So he will get down to business. So I would say that completely disregard that part, that he will have an axe to grind on that. Regarding the FX, I would say we do not know if that's going to have a major impact on that front. I'm not seeing that it is going to go back to 3 years. I mean, we can talk about the real and other fundamentals like the situation of the Minister of the Economy, Paulo Guedes. But Biden, I would say that he might have an impact on Brazilian economy depending on what happened with China, or depending if they decide to put sanctions on some products, particularly in the agricultural exports, which is a powerhouse of Brazilian exports worldwide. So that's a way I would say that more, rather than the situation with the election.
Okay. All right. Good. Let's talk about the topic of China as it relates to Brazil and the penetration of China's economic muscle, if you will, on Brazil's economy. You gave a very compelling map of Mexico showing some of the influence China's had there. Now, what does the picture look like in Brazil, and do you think the Biden administration will push back against China's investment in Brazil, or push back on Brazil about accepting investment from China? And specifically, which areas of the country and which sectors, similar to what you talked about with Mexico, are most impacted?
Yes, that's really relevant. Like the first thing we need to point it out, like the bulk of Chinese investment in Latin America are focused in Brazil. Like accumulated, we're talking about definitely more than 100 billion, and maybe half of that actually focus in Brazil. And you can see here in this chart, in terms of capital goods and even consumer goods, two different trends. Like the Chinese have been increasing since the 2000, up to the point that almost to 30% in the case of capital goods. Meanwhile, the Americans actually that have been decreasing. And Brazil actually surpassed, China surpassed the US as the largest investor in Brazil in 2017. That's actually really important. And they have made a lot of gains in key strategic sectors, in infrastructure, telecommunications, in energy. And Biden administration will continue like the outgoing administration putting pressure that to decouple both economies, because the Americans, they see that with the wary eyes like Chinese investment in the region. To your second point, when we think about it, where actually the investment of China in Brazil, and I would say like, multinationals should be paying attention to that Western. Here on the left, it's a composition of the Brazilian economy by states. And you can see here on the right, what is actually the Chinese projects in Brazil. And this is a trend for the last 5 years. So most of them are actually in the Southeast states, which is actually the most developed. For example, the Chinese company CNOOC, which is a major energy company, they have made significant investment here in the Santos Basin in Sao Paulo, and it's making gain all the way up here to Espírito Santo. Not only that, the State Grid company of China won 2 major contracts of power line electricity connecting all the way from the Danube Pará until the southern states. When I say all that, we cannot dismiss the fact that also Huawei or ZTE, they're making a lot of inwards, and they build a major service industry service here center in Sao Paulo in 2015. And all that, the main point is Chinese in Brazil, they're making inwards. They have a major ally with the powerful agricultural lobby, because most of the soy of Brazil going to China. And across the board, I would say that the competition is just going to get harder in the years ahead. And not even Bolsonaro, who is a pro-Trump, pro-America, could actually curtail that trend.
And so what can President Biden do to counteract that, if anything? Or what specifically does that mean?
Well, it would be, for example, if we think about the trade-off between the Amazon and even like sanctions in the agriculture with the Americans, they do have they do have leeway on that front. They could actually put it as a counterbalance, the situation, like say that the whole issue, the concession with the 5G. So that would be on one front. On the other hand, when we think about it, the view of the current administration, they do have an ally in terms of mentality with the foreign minister, in the case of Ernesto Araujo of Brazil. So that would say that the Biden would be making a lot of business, like the Secretary of State, and trying to lobby on that front. On the other hand, we need to consider here, Rich, that historically Brazil has had an independent foreign policy from the US. And they might actually continue with their projects regardless of what the Biden administration thinks. And the way Biden cannot muscle down Brazil like he might do with other countries like Mexico, that he might have more leverage, because they don't have a FDA with Brazil for that matter. So I would say that it would be carrots and sticks, but it will be more than carrots and sticks for that matter.
Okay, let's try to keep moving around the region in the time we have left, Alejandro. Hopefully we'll get through a lot of this, and maybe we'll go into kind of a little bit of a speed round here. But I'd like to kind of continue exploring the issues that you covered by cluster of countries, and maybe going around the map that you shared with the electoral process over the next couple of years. So quickly, we'll start with Central America and the Caribbean, and specifically, how do you see the Biden administration approaching the migration flows coming to the U.S. from the Northern Triangle countries, and the impact on those countries of this migration policy?
Well, I would say that Biden, the first signal that I see that are positive, the sweeping reform that he announced, that it will be extremely beneficial for the whole region. And just to put it in perspective, remittances, it's a major component of all these economies, as you can see here. Like in the case of Guatemala, it's close to 14% of GDP remittances. So with the sweeping reform that Biden put forward, a more humane approach to handle this issue of migration, different from Trump, and now with the economic stimulus package, this trend that we see here, it might continue at least throughout 2021 for sure. And that's going to be good for the economy overall, and definitely for the B2C sector in particular.
Very good for the B2C sector, yeah. There's a key topic in the Caribbean that I think also you hinted at in the beginning remarks and ties very much to the U.S.-LATAM relations, and that's Cuba and what we can call the Cuba affair. On January 11th, just over a week ago, President Trump left a quote-unquote present to the incoming Biden administration by adding Cuba to the list of states that sponsor terrorism. And thereby trying to put a little bit of an obstacle in Biden's ability to quickly broker rapprochement. What is your take of the Cuba affair under a Biden administration, and could we see a very quick kind of return to the normalization of relations that President Obama had started before President Trump reversed course there?
Well, I see Biden taking a more bold approach because already was done by Obama, that they normalized relationship back in 2014, the end of 2014. But we need to bear in mind that it would be a gradual process. Like normalizing relationship wouldn't be like actually rolling back the Cuban embargo, which is actually dictated by the Congress, the Health and Burden legislation. And I don't see Biden actually spending capital on that front. On the other hand, it would be good, I would say, that the business community in the US, particularly the tech companies, like Google was already making inwards when Obama decided to normalize. And I would say that for IT companies, there is a lot of opportunity if Biden decides to go on that path. The same thing when we think about providers for business and even for the remittance flow too, on the financial sector would be another beneficial issue that it might come out. I would say Biden would go back to the Obama policy, but that would be a gradual process that is not going to be, and might even consume first term and even a second term if Biden gets reelected in 2024.
Okay. I want to turn quickly to Venezuela. Now, I will point out that for many of our clients, Venezuela back in 2015 and before was one of the top 3 markets, right? It was a significant market, and obviously it's been massively deprioritized given all that's gone on there. However, I think it's worth asking the question how you see the Biden administration handling Venezuela, the Venezuelan crisis, following up to the Trump maximum pressure campaign. Will we see any resolution to Venezuela? And if so, what is the timetable potentially to see that?
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll put it like this. I would say Biden might be given a fresh look. There is bipartisan support in the US that definitely Maduro needs to go. The point it would be the way he needs to go. And you can see here, there is a strong misalignment, like 2 blocks, like one led by the US and the EU that support the opposition. And then you have, on the other hand, China, Russia, Iran, and Turkey. And in many ways, Mexico and Argentina, which are more neutral regarding Maduro, that they support him. I would say Biden will continue with the sanctions, although I would say that he would be inclined to explore the dialogue that he has been advanced by the Norwegian and the EU, which is actually a different route from the Trump administration. If that happened, we might see a gradual lifting of the sanctions led by the Treasury Department, and helping particularly the energy sector, which actually has been destroyed and is now in the lowest level in the last 40, 50 years. And it would be good gradually for the business operating environment. Biden will give it a fresh look, but also I wouldn't put my hope that he will take immediately in the front, that it would go back to where it was, say that's 7 years ago, Venezuela.
Okay, and we have about 10 minutes left,
yep.
And there's some parts of the region we still want to get through. Before we move on here quickly, there was one question that came in about Nicaragua and whether Nicaragua is anywhere on the radar screen of the Biden administration, given the map that you've shown us already.
No. Well, Nicaragua is being sanctioned too, and they do have a special legislation that it was passed under Trump. I think there is also bilateral support there and the sanction against the Ortega regime there. And I do not see that actually being lifted unless the Ortega administration sit down with the opposition and finalize the resolution of the conflict that started in the middle of 2018.
Okay. Let's move around talk about some of the governance crises that you highlighted that have become more acute, not only in Latin America, obviously, but also around the world, driven by some structural problems, political stalemates, and obviously all enhanced and accelerated by the COVID economic fallout. And to that end, in the Andean region and the Southern Cone, we've seen these issues manifest themselves, including a country, as you point out, like Chile, which has been praised internationally as one of the most well-managed countries. So looking at this, in your mind, what are the main drivers behind the protests that rocked countries like Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and how do you see Biden administration playing a role in these crises?
That's a great question, Rich, and we can touch all the countries there on that one. And by that, I would say that, first of all, the main issue here goes with the economic inequality. That has been like the main driver when we think about the situation in Chile, that actually started back in 2019 and continues actually until today. And then also, even in many ways, it's a problem in Colombia that I lived there when I visited the country back in November, right before the major protests that happened. In addition, there actually are structural factors, like in the case of Colombia, the polarization that the peace agreement actually generated back in 2016, it continues until today. So you have a Molotov cocktail here. You have on one hand, inequality, you have the political crisis, or you have even historical crisis, like in the case of Colombia, or in the case of Chile, that it goes back to the constitution that was established under the Pinochet regime, that today they actually have surfaced. And the COVID-19, it just has been an accelerator that is going to continue to have an effect. When we think about another important country, like the case of Peru, I think it has to do more with the corruption scandals. And that actually has been, so the last 5 presidents of Peru that are either in jail or they are being prosecuted right now because of corruption scandals. So it's some sort of a social backlash that definitely has pushed the country. And now with the Peru actually declining or contracting by more than 10% in 2020, that actually just fueling more fire. So the governance crisis in the Southern Cone and in the Andean region, that's something that is a risk that I would say that all the clients should be paying attention, because it's going to continue now in 2021 and most likely in 2022 with this government budget reshuffling that we're going to see across the board here.
Okay. I'm watching the clock. I want to get to I want to get quickly to Argentina and how you see the U.S.-Argentina bilateral relations under another Democratic and Peronista administration.
Good point there. Biden now is going to go back to some sort of a rematch, like Obama has a clash with the previous Peronista administration. And the way Biden might have an influence in the case of Argentina would be in the negotiation with the IMF. The Minister of Finance of Argentina, they're expecting to sign a deal now with the IMF in Q1. That would be essential to actually jumpstart the economy that has been contracting for the last 5 to 6 years. But I would say that there will have to be a major trade-off. The Biden administration will put, thanks to the weight that he has on the IMF, a lot of pressure that structural reforms are actually enacted because they don't want to go back, because many of the bondholders of the Argentina debt are actually American investors. So it would be some sort of what happened back in 2014, 2013. And I would say definitely with the Biden administration, the Peronistas, they don't have an ally. Likewise, corruption scandals that they've been rocking countries like Peru, the Biden administration will put pressure in terms of the rule of law affecting Peru, or in the case of Chile, when we think about the human rights situation, and Colombia as well.
Okay. One of the things I want to just wrap up, we have one more polling question, but before we do that, Alejandro, I think we're big believers, as you know, in signposts and scenario planning at FrontierView. And so for our clients, if you had to give them kind of a list of signposts that they should be watching for Biden's first term, and kind of what those mean in terms of positive or negative as it relates to their business and their footprint in Latin America, what would you be pointing to, and what will we continue to come back and analyze and share with our clients?
Sure. I put it here in this slide, and I would say that, going side by side, like the positive, I would say that we already have a good signal, the economic stimulus package that Biden is actually proposing on day one is going to help, and it's going to help particularly when we think Central America and Mexico. I would say a negative signpost would be if Biden get an ideological view of foreign policy and start putting a lot of pressure on countries like Mexico and Brazil on issues like climate change, energy, and human rights without compromising. Because that would create, like to the question that he popped out from a client about, noise affecting like the FX in both countries for that matter. Think about other issues, like if Biden does not go like Trump did, like to change like the FTA that have been signed with other regions would be good, because what investors want is predictability. And that's something that we didn't have with the Trump administration. So that's something that I would say that would be positive. Likewise, the US has a trend, has been reducing like foreign aid to the Northern Triangle countries, and that has to do with the migration. I don't see that a Biden administration doing that, because Biden was handling that portfolio, and it was an increase in 2016, the last year of the Obama administration. I would say other issues here, think about it like, the engagement with governments that they don't see that eye to eye, like Bolsonaro, because Brazil is the top market. And I would say Biden is a pragmatic, so maybe he will find a way to put in issues aside, but he will still put some pressure in terms of human rights or the Amazon for that matter. And the pro-immigration policy, I think Biden already signaled that with the sweeping immigration reform that he's planning to send to Congress tomorrow. So that would be positive. And then just to wrap it up here, I would say Biden just signaled that he will detour from the hardline policy that Trump adopted against Cuba. It would be a positive trend and a positive sign with the US-LATAM relations overall.
So it sounds like if I were a betting man, that your bias is more towards the positive than the negative on most of these. Is that?
Yes, I would say so, based on what Biden has put on the table so far.
Okay. In our last couple of minutes here, I just wanted to ask one more polling question to our listeners. And specifically, again, if you could just select one answer here on the screen, which of these opportunities do you think that your company should prepare for as a highest priority? All right, let's see what our, I think the answers are still coming in fast and furious. Interesting. So continuation of USMCA, it looks like, and then maybe this push towards renewable energy, which I think ties into your climate change point. Alejandro, any observations of this before we wrap up?
Absolutely. I would say the USMCA is going to be a win. Manufacturing states in Mexico in the north and in El Bajío, they will continue to receive investment. So that was definitely a good call that multinationals should be paying attention. And in terms of the green technology, I think Biden definitely is going to push with that. He's helping in the domestic front, he's helping with his base and at the international front. So there would be opportunity for green renewable projects in LATAM across the board in the next 4 years.
Yeah, I'm curious also what the other would entail, but we don't have time to dive into that right now. Alejandro, thank you so much for this excellent, insightful discussion. We covered a ton of ground, and at some point, I feel like we barely scratched the surface. So hopefully we can continue this over the coming months together. Thanks also to our listeners for your questions and participation. I encourage all of our listeners to read all of our analysis on Latin America. There'll be a lot coming forth here, certainly after the Biden inauguration tomorrow. And also, most importantly, schedule individual briefings with Alejandro and members of our LATAM team on this topic, given its importance and how you think about the region over the next 3 to 5 years. As a reminder, FrontierView clients can speak to Alejandro or any member of the FrontierView LATAM research team at any time, simply by scheduling through your client relationship director. And all of FrontierView's research, award-winning Frontier data, and analyst insights are available and always updated on the FrontierView desktop and mobile applications. This concludes today's webcast. We look forward to speaking with you again soon and wish you all a great week.